Where is your mind? Have you ever actually thought about it? I mean, we talk about mind this and mind that, mind your own business, the mind body connection, all these sorts of things. But in today's episode, we're going to explore the question, where is your mind? Maybe you've thought about it, maybe you haven't. And maybe you're like, why does it matter? But this matters because misunderstanding the nature of mind and what we'll get into in more depth in future episodes is the mind body connection. That's what I'm super passionate about, leveraging the mind to heal. And how can we do that if we don't even know what it is, where it is, what it does? So in today's episode, we're going to explore that. And in so doing, hopefully we'll break free from the conditioned thinking of what society and medicine and science and technology tells us about the mind, which is actually false. We're led to believe, a lot of people at least are led to believe that the mind has something to do with the brain and that consciousness comes from the quote unquote mind slash brain just as a result of neurons firing. And this is completely false. And we'll talk about how it's proven to be false. And really, what we'll be doing is breaking through some materialistic, reductionistic science that has kept us collectively trapped in this idea of separation, this idea keeping us from really understanding the truth of who we are, our infinite potential, and breaking through that societal programming. Whether or not it's deliberate, we've slid into it. I don't know. Maybe some conspiracy theorists can help me understand the ways in which we've been duped in terms of the true nature of our multidimensional being. But essentially, my understanding is that true health can only come from understanding our truth. And we can only understand our truth by asking these questions and digging deeper beyond what we're kind of told. So here's what we're going to be exploring today. We're going to be exploring, where is your mind? Hopefully starting to answer that question. And, side note, these are just deeper thoughts that are maybe not necessarily the truth, but it's certainly not. But what we've been told is also not the truth. So hopefully I'm just setting the stage for deeper self-inquiry and exploration within yourself, again, for the purpose of understanding our true nature and living into our fullest potential. We'll also be exploring, where did this quote unquote mind body divide really stem from, and what are the implications of that divide? What is the brain actually for? So I already said that your mind is not your brain, and your consciousness is not just a result of neurons firing in your brain. But what is the brain for? And if you don't know, it's not just for thinking. It's not just for intellectualizing. We'll also talk about near-death experiences and what we can learn from that, as well as, in my experience, I haven't had a near-death experience, spoiler alert, but I have had some really profound spiritual experiences, expanded consciousness through plant medicine and such. So there is a lot of overlap, and we'll explore what those sorts of experiences can help us understand regarding the true nature of mind. And hopefully we'll also discuss how we can use this paradigm shifting understanding of mind and our true nature to shift the way that we think, the way that we live, and the way that we relate to ourselves and our health. So starting out with the quote of the day, I couldn't pick just one quote. I've got 4 quotes here. And the first one is from Dr. Gabor Mate. The brain and body are in constant conversation. The more we listen, the better we heal. The second one from Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. What the mind suppresses, the body expresses. Interesting to think about that. We'll be discussing a lot of these ideas in this podcast, Alter Life, in future episodes. Super excited about that. The next one, this one's unknown. You can't separate the mind from the body. We heal when we integrate both. Spoiler alert, again, we can't separate mind and body. We'll discuss exactly why that is in just a bit. Another one from Larry Dossey. The mind is not the brain. The mind is not in the brain. The brain is in the mind. Now, really sit on that one for a second and think about that brain is in the mind. So, this brings us to part number one of this conversation. Where is your mind? And I do put your in parentheses here because, as we'll start to understand, mind is non local, in fact, and we are all part of and connected with mind. The one mind, as Dr. Larry Dossey calls it, and has written a book with that title, One Mind. It's really a good read. Uh, so, despite the non local nature of the mind and the fact that ancient traditions for eternity have known the non local nature of the mind, we've got this idea that the mind is some physical thing that we can isolate, and we all have one. And the way that I kind of break free from that conditioned thinking is I don't use your and my and the before I say mind. I just refer to mind as mind, not your mind, not my mind, mind. So where is mind? Mind is everywhere. Mind is in everything. Mind is the universal intelligence that is behind all of life. Mind is what brings our heart to beat, what creates a human body from a sperm and an egg through an embryo. Mind is what allows for cell regeneration and healing. Mind is what allows for us to think as well. But mind is not just thinking. Mind is not just intellect. Mind is not just mental. Mind is also the force and the energy behind all of nature, behind a tree growing, behind a cat purring, which he was just purring behind me, but I was like, it was a little distracting. I had to nudge him onto the ground. Mind is behind the tides shifting, the weather. Everything is influenced by mind. Mind is universal wisdom. And I like to use an analogy, which is not mine, but mind is the ocean, and your personal thoughts are just waves forming within it. And I think that this conversation probably maybe already has gotten like a little kind of ambiguous and hard to grasp, and it inherently is. We are inherently, innately multidimensional beings. So this conversation is inherently difficult to grasp with our brain, with our intellect. So a lot of what we're talking about today, and hopefully, something that we can start practicing and doing and living into, is expanding beyond just critical thinking and intellectualizing and conceptualizing, and start to feel into the truth of these words and these topics and these ideas, because that's really where the true insights and transformations happen. They don't happen through just thinking harder and understanding conceptually more. They come through really integrating these ideas. So the key takeaway here is that mind is everywhere, and it's an infinite formless intelligence intertwined within all of life. So yes, mind is in the brain. Mind is in your heart. Mind is in your thumb. Mind is in your pinky toe. Mind is in all of your body and beyond your body. How does that feel? Does that resonate? Are you agreeing with that? Is your body relaxed when you kind of lean into that and receive that new idea? Maybe it's not a new idea. So, second part of this conversation is, what is if mind is universal, non-local, then what are the origins of this mind-body split? How have we come to be conditioned and programmed to believe that there's this mind-body connection? So the origins, as far as I understand, as far as I've, known in my, research that I've done, really comes from Cartesian duality. Descartes, I think, therefore I am. And this philosophical idea, I think that my understanding is that people took this philosophical idea that Descartes had 300 some odd years ago and started to totally revolutionize the way that they're thinking, because that of course led into even more separation and reductionism through Western medicine. Of course, Cartesian dualism, Descartes was not too far before the formation of what we now refer to as modern medicine. And modern medicine just took this idea and ran with it. Modern medicine took this idea of mind and body being separate and the body just being this mechanical thing, and everything that we experience should be able to be described through understanding this mechanical system that we call our body. And that, of course, led to further separation as modern medicine progressed. And we like the collective thought like, oh, the more we reduce things, the more we are able to study things and become specialists in that and that. There's a liver specialist, there's a eye specialist, there's all sorts of specialists. And now, of course, there are subspecialists that specialize in just one specific eye condition, and they're super experts in this sort of thing. But what happens? We lose sight of the forest through the trees, right? We totally get lost in the weeds, and we have been down this incredibly windy rabbit hole in modern medicine and modern science at large, breaking things down, trying to piece things back together, but unable to, because sure, there's, you can break things down all you want, but that doesn't necessarily help us understand the whole better. So modern medicine, of course, I don't need to go down, and the rabbit hole of all the issues with reductionistic science and materialistic modern medicine, and treating parts and pieces as if you were a car and you're just going to the mechanic for, tire rotations and oil changes and check engine lights are on. And it's like, what? Like, that doesn't work. It works, of course, in like the battlefield, as some people say, emergency medicine. We got to put things back together that are physically broken. But true health does not come from rotating your tires or changing your oil or these sorts of things. It's not to say that we don't need to take care of our physical bodies, right? So the mind, meanwhile, the body was treated as like the car that you take to the mechanic. Mind was treated similarly. Mind was reduced into thoughts and feelings. And then mind is treated by psychiatrists and psychologists that just think about mind and intellect. And of course, there's a lot of problems with that. There's a lot of fraudulent science that has been uncovered with regard to quote unquote mental health disorders. And fun fact, if you're not already aware, the whole idea of your mood and mental health coming from some sort of neurochemical imbalance, that's fraudulent science, despite multi-billion dollars worth of drugs being prescribed, and this whole philosophy and theory and idea stemming from fraudulent science. So I found it interesting. I guess I knew this, but it's amazing to just realize that modern pharmaceutical treatment of psychiatric, quote unquote, psychiatric illness didn't start until the 1950s. That was, of course, the precedent for that was the creation of the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, or the DSM-5, excuse me, the DSM. Now we have the DSM-5 70 years later. But I'll just ask you the question. In the last 70 years, since the quote unquote establishment of the psychiatric practice and the treatment of quote unquote mental disorders with psychiatric pharmaceutical medications, has mental health gotten better, quote unquote mental health gotten better in the last 70 years by the technological advancements, so to speak, that have led us to quote unquote understand mental health better? Do we understand mental health better? And are we able to manage or treat or fix people better now, 70 years later, than we were in the 1950s? I don't know. Of course, I wasn't around in the 1950s, but by my understanding of statistics, mental health disorders are exploding. And of course, that begs the question of, well, are they just exploding because we are better at identifying and describing and seeing them? I don't think so. Again, I've only been around for 37 years, but I don't. I think that we're not on a positive trajectory as far as quote unquote mental health goes. So, anyways, this mind body split. I think we were maybe led to believe collectively that, oh yeah, we're advancing technology, understanding the human body and the mind and the quote unquote mind better. But are we? If we are, then this is pretty sad. The progression of, again, modern medicine and specifically the separation between the mind and the body, the treatment of mind and body symptoms or conditions. All right, I paused this episode to bring us to a new segment. If you're new to the podcast, this is the lesson of the day. The lesson of the day is don't confront challenges or conflicts from a place of anger or upset. And this is really hard. This one I've learned mainly through my relationship with Susanna. I was kind of led to believe that when I feel angry or upset, I need to work through that feeling or that issue like in the moment when it was ripe. But nothing ever good comes from a place of anger or upset. So the lesson here is to let yourself equilibrate, let yourself find balance. And the interesting thing is that when we do that, when we give ourselves a little bit of time and space and compassion, the quote unquote issue that we thought we had, either with ourselves, either with another person, or our spouse, our kids, like the issue, quote unquote, tends to just like work itself out most of the time. And if it doesn't, then we're able to have new perspective, new insights to address the issue at hand. And then we're more easily able to resolve that with more grace and ease. So again, the lesson is to just let things go. It's okay to turn your back on a conflict or an issue, cool down, walk out of the room, hang up the phone, like whatever it looks like, and then allow yourself to revisit that so-called issue with a fresh perspective. And this applies again to romantic partnerships, friendships, parenting, professional relationships, really anything. All right, now back into the episode. We're talking about what is the brain actually used for now. So we talked about the mind not being the brain. We talked about this mind-body split. So if the brain is not the mind, what is the brain used for? And I, of course, probably like you, was taught that the brain is a source of neural activity that's required for thinking and problem solving. And I was also taught that the evolution of humanity was dependent on the growing of a brain. And that growing of a brain was dependent on various factors, maybe nutrition and so forth. But there are numerous cases that really call into question that idea, that understanding of the brain. There are numerous hydrocephalus patients that have been studied. And hydrocephalus, for those who don't know, it's essentially means water on the brain. So the skull is filled with lots of water that puts pressure on the brain, and it can be, of course, a serious condition. But a lot of people have this congenital hydrocephalus condition, and then they go about their lives living totally normal lives without knowing that they've got hydrocephalus. And then it becomes an incidental finding. And there have been numerous studies around these people who go about living normal lives with normal intellect, normal or above normal intellect. And then they have like a brain X-ray, MRI, CAT scan, whatever. And there's like little or no brain in their skull. And it's like, whoa, where was all that life, intellect, understanding, knowledge, problem solving coming from? So of course the brain there are neurons and they do fire, and there are different parts of the brains that are associated with different things. But again, the purpose of just sharing this information is to really just let go of the idea of like maybe everything and anything, and just open your quote unquote mind to new possibilities. Another example of the brain not necessarily being directly associated with intellect and problem solving is Einstein's brain. Einstein, of course, allegedly like this genius, right? And then after he died, people are like, oh, we want to study Einstein's brain. And it turns out he had a smaller than normal brain. And I was led to believe that someone's intellectual capacity is dependent on the size of the brain and the complex structure of what are called gyri and sulci, the folds in the brain, and increasing surface area. And also we're told that as we age, the brain kind of shrivels, and that is what is associated with dementia and Alzheimer's. Not necessarily the true. The point is, like, we don't know. And maybe we do have closer to infinite potential than we realize. So if the brain is not directly associated with thinking and intellect, or not only associated with thinking and intellect, what else could it be used for? Well, there are theories that the brain is like a receiver of consciousness. So back to this universal mind, the brain is like a receiver that's receiving and filtering or regulating the consciousness, and kind of like a TV. When you turn on the TV, it's not like the TV is the source of the TV show that you're watching. Even, this of course applies to old school televisions where you tune the radio or tune the station and get through the static and get the channel. This applies to that, and also applies to like the TV that's now internet. This what you're looking at is not coming from the screen; it's coming through the screen. So that's kind of one idea or theory around what the brain is in some way responsible for, filtering and regulating the stream of consciousness, if you will, that gives us life. Back to mind, the mind that flows through us, giving us life, giving us consciousness. And this is corroborated with what we're going to be talking about next, which is near-death experiences. And again, I already said, I haven't had a near-death experience. I don't necessarily want to have a near-death experience, even though they sound super cool from all the research that I've done, all the stories that I've heard. But the interesting thing about near-death experiences, for those unfamiliar, is that what classifies someone as dead or nearly dead or dead is the lack of brain activity. And despite there being zero brain activity, people's consciousness expands. There's more connection, there's more insight, there's more vision, beyond what we have been, programmed to feel. So it's almost like the regulator or the filter that is the brain is removed, and now we're just connected with like one mind fully. We're like, we got full access to everything, right? And that's kind of what people's stories are around their near-death experiences, like really being connected with unity, source directly. And again, I talked about how there are some overlaps between the various plant medicines. Ayahuasca is what I have most personal experience with, and these sort of similar conditions or similar states of consciousness as well. And the thing about plant medicines like ayahuasca is that they, despite having, like, again, increased levels of consciousness and visions and experiences that are profound, what happens neurologically is various areas of the brain are actually turned down in terms of their activity. Mainly the default mode network, which is the area of the brain that is associated with sense of self. So this brings us to the idea of ego dissolution, which is kind of this, loss of sense of self, merging into oneness. And again, kind of makes sense when you think about the brain being, and maybe specifically the default mode network of the brain being this regulator of consciousness, of mind activity. And then we are, no longer regulated and no longer filtering that information and that energy, and we're connected with it full force. So yeah, just some things to think about, like, again, I find a lot of empowerment in understanding these ideas that are expanding my quote unquote mind and my understanding of reality, because this feels empowering to me because again, it kind of opens me up to the infinite potential and all of the possibilities that maybe I've otherwise been programmed and conditioned to think that I'm super limited and life is just this physical thing. And it's there's more meaning and purpose and possibilities with this level of consciousness, this understanding, this way of thinking. And I think that this is really helpful, as we'll discuss in future episodes, when it comes to our experience of physical health. Again, understanding our true nature, our limitless nature, and not being defined by the physical words, diagnoses, conditions, symptoms, thinking outside of the box, feeling outside of the box, living outside of the box, right? So this brings us to the challenge of the day as we are wrapping up today's episode. The challenge of the day is to interrupt the patterns in your life. And I'm going to explain what I mean here. So essentially, do something differently. And a lot of us have routines. We wake up at the same time, we brush our teeth, we go to the bathroom, blah, blah. It's like we're kind of living on autopilot. So the challenge is to do something differently. Maybe it's as simple as brushing your teeth with your other hand. Maybe it is taking a new way to work or to school or home. Maybe it's opening up like a random book that's been sitting on your shelf and reading it. And like, yeah, it's like, whoa, what's new? What's available? And in so doing, this pattern disruption, we shift out of this autopilot mode and we open ourselves up to new possibilities, new ways of thinking, maybe even tapping in more closely with the universal one mind. So in closing, final thoughts here are, I hope that this inspires you to think and live outside the box, consider the infinite possibilities that are available to you. And if this did resonate, if you did have an insight, if you are taking actions in some sort of way, feel free to leave a comment, send me a DM or an email, info@alter.health. And until next time, keep thriving. Peace and love.